This is Transcast from the METRANS Transportation Center. I'm Mat Kaplan. Growing cities around the world face so many challenges. Not the least of these is making sure freight can move efficiently, safely, and as cleanly as possible through ever more crowded streets. Other changes, like home delivery of merchandise, aren't making this any easier. Alison Conway is a civil engineer who studies these challenges at City College of New York, where she is an assistant professor in the Grove School of Engineering. Her expertise also includes commercial freight policy and logistics, making her the ideal candidate to teach a groundbreaking course supported by METRANS and Metro Freight, a center of excellence in urban freight funded by the Volvo Research and Education Foundations. The first offering of this pilot class, Urban Freight and City Logistics, was completed in the spring of 2015. As you'll hear in my recent Skype conversation with Alison, it was a great success and will be offered once again before the curriculum developed for it is made available to institutions everywhere. Alison Conway, welcome to Transcast.
Thanks.
Great to have you on to talk about this course, which was kind of a pioneering effort from what I've read about it, Urban Freight and City Logistics. I read that this was the first course offered in the Metro Freight Center's new effort to build interdisciplinary graduate-level programs about this very important issue of urban freight that we'll be talking about today, as well as talking about the class. How do you think it went? I mean, you really were kind of running a prototype, weren't you?
Yeah, so this was a completely new course that we developed kind of jointly as a center. I think it was a very good first effort. It was a really interesting mix of students participating in the course and new topics that we hadn't necessarily been including in our academic programs previously.
How did you offer it? I know it was offered at least in part, or was it entirely offered as a distance learning or online course?
So it was an interesting format and a totally new format for me. We started here at the City College of New York. It was basically offered as any traditional course would be in a standard classroom, students sitting in that classroom with me as the instructor. However, we also wanted to include students from our other consortium universities. Now, due to the time requirements for the course, the only other city within the consortium that we were able to include in the course during this pilot run was students from USC in California. Those students were actually connected to the classroom. They were also together in a classroom on the other coast and logged in through the Adobe Connect system, which we used to communicate both video and PowerPoint presentations that they were able to see, as well as me as the instructor and the students in my classroom.
You said this was the first time using this kind of technology for you. How'd you like it?
Overall, the technology worked really well. It was good to be able to bring in experts, not only within the two classrooms. We were actually able to host guest lectures from third-party locations. We did struggle with some technology issues trying to match up inherently incompatible technology systems between two universities. Led to some interesting playing around with audio equipment for several weeks of the semester, just trying to get things to work. But once it ran smoothly, things worked really well. And I think those issues are just things that now when we offer the course again in another year, we should be able to deal with those issues up front, and it shouldn't be a major problem at all.
That's good to know, and I guess that's some of the hazards of running an experimental or prototype program. And you've already answered one of my questions, and that is, will the course be offered again? Obviously, it was seen as a success.
Yeah. We definitely learned some lessons, both on the technology side and in terms of the content of the course, that we plan to address in a second iteration. But absolutely, our plan is to offer the course once more as a pilot, again, between City College and USC, and possibly include some students from Long Beach if it's possible to have that work out. Once we are done going through the second pilot, we actually intend to post the curriculum and make it available for other universities who may be interested, not so much in the technology aspects of the course, but in the actual course content, so that they can pull either the full course content or pieces of it to incorporate into their own programs.
Sure, and that's a big part of the mission of the center, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The intent of this course is not just to develop a course that we can use internally, but to contribute to the education in the area of urban freight and create something that can be replicated internationally.
Well, before we talk more about the course, let's get more into this issue, this field that you were hoping to acquaint your students with. And that, of course, is urban freight. And, we're looking around the world at many, not all, but many cities only becoming bigger and denser. But goods still have to find the way to stores and consumers. Is this a big challenge?
Yeah, so urban freight is a tremendous challenge, and I would say a couple of trends that have happened over the last decade or maybe the last 20 years have made it even more challenging. A couple things. One, just the rise of just-in-time delivery systems within commercial retailers and manufacturers, as well as the rise of e-commerce, which has totally changed the patterns of which deliveries are happening in urban areas. It's no longer just getting freight into old commercial strips limited to very specific areas of the city, but now it's actually moving freight door to door to individual consumers.
Yeah, wait a minute. I have to look out front and see if my Amazon delivery that I ordered yesterday is here waiting for me.
Exactly.
Obviously, it's a big challenge. That was a leading question if there ever was one. I was very interested to see in the syllabus, though. I mean, a lot of people might think of the sort of surface issues of dealing with congestion, all these trucks and delivery vans on the road, and making those prompt deliveries. But you made a much deeper connection, it appears, to how urban freight is related to the success of regional economies. Is that fair?
Right, absolutely. Freight is an indicator of economic health in a region. So if there are no goods flowing to or through a region, that means there are limits on what people in that region are buying, indicating possible impacts on quality of life. It also indicates that the retailers or manufacturers in that area are not moving goods, which if there's no freight, it means that there's less economic activity or no economic activity.
With the study of these issues, the gathering of data and the building of models, which maybe we'll also get into a little bit more later, are better solutions starting to appear?
Yes, this whole body of research and practice, I would say, has really emerged over the last 15 years with leadership of the issue coming probably internationally, especially experts in Europe and Japan, I would say, have been out in front of us in the US on addressing this issue. I think at least in part due to the way that cities are structured and the density of the cities in those locations compared to the US. Maybe they got to a critical point a little bit faster than we did because of the lower densities and more highway-oriented development that we have here. But over that period, there has been a lot of effort in developing research programs to address these issues, developing new stakeholder communication strategies to improve the way that the industry is communicating with the government who is implementing transportation plans, and working with the technology companies to develop technology-based solutions. There has been tremendous progress over the last 15 years in finding new ways to do this.
That theme you mentioned of advances made in places like Japan and Europe, that has come up before on this program and on our sister program, ContainerCast. Are we able to learn from Europe and Japan and maybe other regions, or are those, do they have enough in common with the United States for us to be able to adapt some of those solutions?
In the U.S., I'm probably in a slightly unique solution being in Manhattan, in New York City. We're pretty much at the extreme where you can get in terms of density in the
I'll
US.
say, yeah.
I would say absolutely there are lessons learned. Not every solution is going to be immediately implementable from one city to another. There are certain conditions that have to be in place for successful solutions to happen. But I would also say that a lot of that work that's been done in Europe has not necessarily just been done in Paris and London and the largest cities, but also a lot of work has been done in medium-sized cities, which do have lower densities or lower populations that might be more comparable to US cities as well. The short answer is yes, I think solutions are adaptable, but we need to identify kind of what are the fundamental characteristics of the cities that make that solution work there. And figure out where here those same characteristics exist.
Back to the course, your syllabus lists as its first objective, first of three, the combination of two fields of study that you said have not always been considered together. What are those? Tell us about this.
Yeah, so the two primary areas of study that we've laid out as sort of the fundamentals of this course are urban studies and freight transportation. Based on our experience working in academic research and with practitioners, we've found that at least on the academic side, there has not necessarily been a whole lot of overlap between the study of these fields. Now, city logistics solutions and urban freight solutions require information on understanding how supply chains work and what are the factors that impact the choices that a shipper is going to make or the choices that a driver is going to make, while at the same time understanding what are the impacts going to be on a city from different decisions that are going to be made. Beyond just urban studies and freight transportation, but delving into the academic fields that we work in, I'm a civil engineer. Many of the others in our center are either geographers or urban planners. Our experience is that almost none of our academic programs offer any comprehensive discussion of the topic of freight transportation beyond the individual courses that we've developed ourselves, whereas freight transportation has been kind of isolated into business schools and supply chain management programs. City logistics solutions really can't tolerate not understanding both sides of the equation. Our attempt here is to try to figure out how can we fill in the gaps between what have been traditionally viewed as kind of separate fields of study.
It's fascinating that this is fairly new, because it does seem that these would mesh together almost in an essential fashion. And you said it's new for the most part in academia. Are there urban planners out there helping to put cities together and help them run better? Have they been familiar with this and the fact that urban freight is a very important factor for them to consider?
Clearly, I'm biased as a freight researcher, but I would say that there is actually a very low level of freight knowledge among the average beginning urban planners coming out of academic programs. I've heard colleagues say that repeatedly they hear from students coming out of urban planning programs that what they hear in their programs is freight is important, but I'm not going to teach you about it. It hasn't traditionally been part of the curriculum, so the faculty have not had it as part of their curriculum, so then they're not comfortable teaching it. That's actually one of the key drivers for us in this course, is to offer sort of canned materials that even a non-expert could take to start to address these issues in their courses, whether it be, again, a full-blown course in urban freight or city logistics, or breaking it down to, a single module that might be incorporated into a general urban planning class.
You obviously wanted your students to gain an understanding of how and where data about goods movement, freight, urban freight can be collected, which seems like a very big challenge. Was that a really important element of this class?
Yeah, absolutely. We want students to be able to understand what are the sources of freight data that are out there and how can they actually be collected, because freight data in general is an extremely challenging issue, because although privacy is an issue in data collection for any mode of transportation, because if you're collecting information about the way that people are traveling, you're learning something about them. In freight, in addition to the personal privacy of the driver, you get into the issue of market competitiveness and protecting trade secrets, and the data that company has gives them a competitive advantage. Having the public sector access private sector freight data is a huge challenge that I would say we still haven't really resolved the issue of how that can be collected. Unfortunately, that's where the best data lies, within those private sector sources, because particularly in the US, previous to the passage of the last highway bill, which did include some major provisions for freight and for freight performance measurement, freight has not been a large part of the mandatory requirements for MPOs and other agencies to prioritize, I guess, in their efforts. So I would say that's something that's changed nationally here in the US, that there's a renewed interest in this subject. But up until the passage of MAP 21, freight data collection has not been a priority either.
That's a tough one. I mean, as you said, there are proprietary issues involved in getting companies to release this data, which they may think is helping them to remain competitive, and convince them that this is going to make them even more competitive. That does sound like a challenge.
Right. Absolutely.
Let's say you're able to dig up enough data to build a model with this, but model building seems to me to be a much higher level, much more complex task. Is that something you got into very deeply with this class?
So in this course, because it was somewhat of an overview course, we were not able to spend a whole lot of time on freight modeling. I did bring in a guest lecturer who is another modeling expert from our center, Dr. Qian Wang from the University of Buffalo. She did give a kind of overview lecture, a very good overview lecture on the different types of freight models that we can use and the different inputs that are required to run those models. However, the course, I guess we could offer an entirely second course in freight modeling or
I'm
multiple.
probably several, yeah, a whole program. Yeah, it's quite a topic to take on, but at least your students got an introduction to the concepts. I saw that the biggest single factor in your grading was a project that was assigned to the students. What did you ask them to do?
Right. So we basically asked the students to identify a case study, and I intentionally left it very open-ended because city logistics is such a broad field, and there are a lot of different solutions that can be applied, some of which are technology-based, some of which are policy-based, to kind of let the students focus in on their own particular interests. But we asked them to identify some specific city logistics solution or policy intervention from anywhere in the world, basically, and discuss the details of that implementation, including what is the context for urban freight in the city. So what does the population look like? What are the industries that are operating in that city? What are the traffic conditions? And then building on that, what is the actual challenge or problem to be dealt with? For example, in this course, we had students from New York and Los Angeles. And in New York, our students tend to focus on the very last mile issues like parking, because that's what we see on the streets of Manhattan. We see trucks double parked in the bike lanes. And so
Oh, yeah.
we tend to be very focused in on those issues. Whereas the students from California are watching the operations of the largest port in the US and seeing that freight move through their urban area. So the urban freight challenge in Los Angeles, yes, Los Angeles absolutely has parking issues as well, but maybe the dominant issue that's of concern to them, it's more how do we move all of this freight coming through on containers from the port through our city effectively. Identifying what is the specific challenge that needs to be dealt with, and then really dig in on what was the solution proposed, who were the stakeholders that were involved, what are the benefits, what are the challenges, and then finally, is this a solution that you think can be transferred to other cities? Why or why not?
Did you get some interesting results out of this? And I would include in that, among those results, your students themselves and their reactions to what they were learning as part of doing this project, and really maybe the whole course.
We did see some really interesting projects come out of this. One thing that I noticed with my New York students, and this tends to happen in everything New York related, is that my New York students immediately looked for New York problems and New York solutions.
Well, good for them, I say.
So, which absolutely, it actually, I learned a lot because they identified projects that maybe weren't something I had focused in on, and were able to talk about those with a local perspective. So it was actually a really good to learn in depth about issues here in New York. But there were also students who identified projects of interest to them from Mexico City and Dresden, Germany, and from all over the world, getting really very different perspectives on these challenges. And I think it was a good project because it brought to light not that in some ways cities are dealing with very similar problems, but that the way that those problems can be addressed will vary significantly depending on, the government structure and even just the culture of the city and how people respond to different proposed solutions. So I think it was a pretty interesting and effective project in that way.
You started to answer my next question, which would have been, what did you learn by teaching this class? And I'm hoping that this includes that there was a real interest and maybe enthusiasm by your students for learning about this field.
Yeah, that's one thing. Absolutely. I have to say, anyone who teaches freight at the university level, when you offer a freight course, very few students come in with any specific interest in freight, or at least they don't think they have a specific interest in freight. And again, going back to something I said earlier, that academic programs have limited coverage. Another thing that I found through talking to all kinds of people working in the field of freight within the realms of civil engineering and urban planning is that almost everyone ends up here accidentally. No one went into grad school thinking, I want to study freight planning. they almost always just got involved in a research project or took a course and decided they really like it. I think we got very good response from students who came in not necessarily knowing what they were getting themselves into, and really did leave the course with an appreciation for freight and an interest in freight issues. Since then, I've had a couple of the students contact me about doing their master's projects, and they want to do it on a freight-focused topic, which is exciting to me to have created enough interest in the topic that they want to pursue it further beyond the course.
That may very well end up being the best outcome of this course, that you've turned on a group of new professionals to this important field. So are we looking at spring of 2016 for the return of urban freight and city logistics?
We'll be teaching it in spring of 2017. My course cycle here at City College is we offer the graduate electives every other year.
Sounds like you're going to be looking forward to teaching this again.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to teaching it and tweaking the curriculum to upgrade slightly from what we did during the last iteration.
And in the meantime, teaching your other courses there at CCNY and continuing your research. I mean, who knows? There may be much more for you to include in the course by the time this comes up in 2017.
Yep, absolutely.
Alison, it's been a delight talking with you. Thank you very much for putting this prototypical course together, which obviously was enormously successful. Also for spending the time with us today on Transcast.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about the course.
You've been listening to Transcast with our guest, Dr. Alison Conway, Assistant Professor in the Department of Engineering at the Grove School of Engineering, City College of New York. Dr. Conway successfully taught the first ever offering of a course titled Urban Freight and City Logistics, with support from METRANS and the Volvo Research and Education Foundations. Transcast is a production of the METRANS Transportation Center, which is funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation and the California Department of Transportation, Caltrans. Want to participate in great conversations like the one you've just heard? Consider joining hundreds of researchers and industry representatives at the International Urban Freight Conference, coming to Long Beach, California, October 21st to 23rd, 2015. You can learn more and register to attend at metrans.org. Can't join us in person? Visit metrans.org after the conference. You'll find every presentation delivered. I'm Mat Kaplan. Thanks for listening to Transcast.